if you can, type in chat where you guys are dialing in from, and what's the one main thing you want to take away from today. We have a really great panel here today, again, speaking about how customer success fits into your organization. And I think we want to go ahead and get started. As James mentioned, I'm Akil. I'm the moderator for this session. And we're going to start with intros with this esteemed panel here. What we're going to do in terms of intros is we're going to say where we work, the number of people at our org and in our department, so folks can get an idea in terms of scale, how we might think differently about customer success, and what is our main KPI and why. So to kick us off, I'll go first. So again, my name is Akil. I work at Klaviyo. And the number of people in the customer success org, I feel like I wouldn't give it any justice if I didn't say that everyone is a part of customer success. But to be more specific, it's about 150 folks in the CS org. And our main KPI is net revenue retention. The reason being is net revenue retention allows us to have a more holistic approach to how we think about customer success in terms of upgrading and maintaining accounts, keeping those churn numbers low. And so with that, I want to turn it over to our first panel host, Kristen. Kristen, would you mind telling folks where you work, number of people in your org, and main KPI and why?
Sure. Hi, I'm Kristen Curtis. I am working at Repeat as the head of customer success. Repeat is basically the reorder button for one-time purchases for e-commerce customers. I was number 5 in January of employees. We are now up to 15. And in the department itself, we are 2. Hopefully going to be 4 or 5 by the end of the year. So if anybody's looking, come check me out. I'm not actually kidding. And our main KPI is net dollar retention. So our customers, the more they utilize our product, the more money they make. And so, our goal is obviously to make them as successful as possible. So our main KPI is just to make sure that we're continuing to work with them to make sure they make the most that they can.
Awesome. Thanks, Kristen. Next up, we have Greenie.
Good morning. My name is Greenie St. Jean, and I am the CS manager at ConnectRN. We are a clinician-based company that allows us to provide the clinicians with the opportunity to have a flexible schedule and work and balance their work life. So we partner with facilities within Massachusetts, Ohio, Pennsylvania, just to name Florida, Georgia, just to name a few, and we continue to scale. And the clinicians are allowed from that point to pick their schedule where they would like to work, just as much flexibility and advocacy for all of our clinicians, LPNs, RNs, CNAs, GNAs, and such. Currently, we consist of about 100 team members, 30 being on the CS team. And our main KPI, are CS-driven metrics. And they allow us to gauge clinician need, company need, internally and externally, so that we are successfully exceeding the clinician's expectations and that we're able to continue to scale as a company.
Awesome. Thanks, Greenie. And next up is Sean.
Morning, everyone. I'm Sean Mcpherson. So I lead our customer success team over at a company based in Boston called Alice. And what we do is we help create personal experiences in our customers' marketing and sales efforts via gifting and swag. And we're roughly about 200 employees today. CS at Alice is really comprised of several amazing different functions and folks that include our customer success managers, our solutions team, our account management team, and our support team. In total, that's about a team of 25 folks, with our North Star, similar to some of the other folks here, of being net revenue retention. And this, in addition to that being just a really holistic metric to focus on, it helps us create a great ecosystem of supporting leading metrics too, in terms of product adoption, time to value, and sentiment, both external and CSM led. And one thing at Alice that we live and breathe is our 5 to 9. So a little bit about me is I'm also a track and field coach that I specialize in the 800 meter and javelin too.
Awesome. Cool. So let's jump into our Q&A. So folks, as you've heard, we have folks on the panel who come from a range of different company sizes. And so with that, the first question I wanted to ask is, how do you define customer success at each stage of your business? Kristen, can you kick it off?
Sure. So what's interesting about Repeat specifically is, as I mentioned, I was number 5. And so, we had about, I think like 36, 37 customers at that point. And, in my mind, if you have customers, you need some form of customer success. Prior to me joining, the co-founder and head of product was also doing customer success as well. So very quickly realized that we need somebody to focus on it. And so, for me, we are technically like a managed service. And so our customers don't actually have anything in their own hands at this moment. We help them do practically everything. So right now where we are, we only have customer success because we are helping them in every way, between implementation to strategy and so forth. Once those customers do have something in their own hands, that's when we'll have a support team. Eventually, we'll also have some form of education, right, where we can actually have them self-serve. But what I loved about Repeat and the way the co-founders thought about it was, we need to hire the best of the best to build this from the top down, versus bringing in just, a junior CSM to kind of get some stuff done and make it work. So I think that, when you think about your customers, without them, the business is nothing. And so the earlier, the better, in my mind.
Awesome. Greenie, how are you defining customer success at your business?
From the very beginning as well, to piggyback off of what Kristen says, from the moment that you see even an advertisement or a Facebook post about ConnectRN, you reaching out to us or facility reaching out to us providing you with as much information as we can, that is from the beginning setting the tone and moving forward from there. We do have a little bit of a larger startup, so we are able to partner with operations clinician hub so that we give the clinicians the ability to assist themselves, but we're always there for them. So they have the ConnectRN app readily available. Our products team was amazing and they created that for them. And we also provide them with education regarding it, like how to do this, how to do that. And our CS team is always ready and willing to answer the phones or send messages via text message or email to assist them. If I were to contact and be like, well, I'm not really sure how to look at my schedule, we're always available to give them a breakdown on how to download the app, process the app, and not only that, but just to service them however we can.
Awesome. And Sean, how do you guys define customer success?
Yeah, it's changed over the years as we've scaled. So over the past 2 years, we've really grown as a company from small startup to more mid-sized startup. So there's a lot of factors that go into how we approach this early stage, from who we were marketing to, who our target customer was, where is our product, how much can we actually ask for in terms of money, and what are the expectations of our market, which was a really big one for us. So for us at Alice, when we started customer success, and even as we've thought about evolving it and growing it, we had 2 major factors that we had to consider. One being, we actually just pivoted our go-to-market model from selling to single users to selling to companies with a actual platform fee. The other being the market we are tackling. So it was a new market. We are tackling kind of our ICP was going to be approached with technology companies. They had a perception and expectation with how gifting and swag work, mainly from their previous experiences with agencies. So what we had to do early on, and how we've kind of approached our maturity of our customer success, is we by nature we had to over-index on change management aspects of our implementations, or else folks wouldn't get why Alice improved their business. So we had to take more of a hands-on approach with our customers, because they had that expectation and that perception early on that typically I'm working with an agency. I'm not necessarily working with a product. But as we're starting to evolve and figure out opportunities to improve and scale out our customer success motion, we're investing in areas where tech and one-to-many approaches will play in product-based approach as well.
Cool. So Sean, I wanted to follow up on something you mentioned. So you talked about growing and evolving. customer success. And I think for startups, really kind of the burning question that a lot of folks might have is, at what point should customer success become its own team or role?
I think I'm going to be very biased on this just to kick off with that one. But honestly, in my opinion, it's as soon as you have tangible revenue. So once you have a customer, you need to understand what is making them successful. Why should they continue with your product? What feedback do they have? How do you start making it easier and faster to get to that point of value? So on and so forth. Doesn't necessarily mean that you go out and hire like someone that's coming from Oracle to come in and build like a massive structure. A lot of times this means like just need someone in seat potentially to focus on ensuring that customers achieving value and understanding that, and how are you starting to think about scaling that. So typically I say the second you start getting revenue is super important, because you want to understand why that customer is there and why they want to stay with you in particular.
Awesome. Greenie, what do you think?
I agree with Sean. Just to like add a little bit more, I believe whenever you start getting the revenue, the people and the ability, it's honestly just, okay, what are we here for? How can we assist you? How can we continue to streamline this process so that it's readily available, accessible as we can, and accessible as we continue to scale? How are we implementing this? What can we do? Like, what is the product that we're trying to put before you? And are we being successful in assisting you in properly using that product and what it is that you're contacting us for? And not only that, so my bias is you should always have a CS team, right? And I understand that's not always possible or feasible, but I feel like from the very moment, every person on the team plays a role in CS. So even if you don't currently have the revenue or the people, anyone who's available can be a CS team member by just putting that time aside to assist and assess as best as we can.
Cool. Kristen, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have two. One is, I think it boils down to communication, right? Like if you don't have a CS person, you don't have somebody who is so ingrained in the customers, who can understand why they're there, what's working, what's not, what are the things that are keeping them, right? If you're just doing 4 other jobs plus this, you're not going to have that in-depth knowledge, and you're not going to have somebody to be that point person to let everyone else know within the company what they need to be working on, what's not working, what needs to be fixed, right? That's ultimately what we're here for, other than obviously making our customers successful. And the other thing I think is it really boils down to like the way the top is thinking about customers and customer success, right? A ton of businesses think of customer success as like a cost center, right? Like, well, you're just here to kind of get that churn let down and it's costing us an arm and a leg. But 3 out of the 4 of us talked about net revenue retention, right? And the fact of the matter is that's truly what we do, is we allow your business to continue to go on because we're retaining these customers. And without them, with a high amount of churn and a low amount of continued success, the business is no longer, right? So I think it really boils down to, you need somebody who can actually have that communication within the business, but you also need the people within the business to understand the true value of customer success.
So something I want to double tap on. So we're talking about customer success, but oftentimes you also hear customer support. What's the difference between customer success and customer support? Kristen, you want to kick us off?
Sure. So the way I look at it from a simple level is like proactive versus reactive, right? So in my mind, and when I say customer support, depending on what we're talking about, it's kind of an umbrella term, right? But in reality, like if you think about the 2 different departments, you've got customer success, who is here to help strategize with you, make sure that you see the true value of what you're doing, not necessarily answering your technical questions. And sometimes we do that too, right? It depends on the department and how it's structured. But success or support is there for when you have a question, you come to them, they are there to help you. We are there to proactively make sure that you're seeing the value of whatever the product is.
Cool. Greenie, do you want to follow that up?
Of course. So for me, customer support is like the tools, the product, like the organization, the creating the product, while customer success is the implementation. So for instance, our team we work with at ConnectRN, we work with Salesforce and Aircall. Those provide us with the tools as well as our product operations team to continue to provide products and really resources for the clinicians' facilities to use so that they can be successful. But for customer success, it's our job to implement that. It's our job to process, to also assist them with it, to successfully use like both Salesforce, Aircall, soft skills, communication skills to successfully help them, like to assist them and make sure that the goal is reached. So to me, that's the difference. Support is the product, success is the implementation and the execution.
Cool. Sean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, very similar to what we were just hearing and similar to what Kristen was saying. And depending on your stage, it's totally a moving line is what I've learned over time. So for example, at Alice, we actually didn't have customer support until we had about 50 customers. At that point in time, we started seeing these repeatable themes. We started selling our product a little bit more consistently. We had consistency also in our CSM motion. So for us, it was time to move these reactive things with our end users and our admins into a team that honestly can handle this better at scale. And quite frankly, it's a better experience at the end of the day. So the biggest difference now is our CSM's focus on the future and ensuring our customer behaviors are on track for success, where our support team is more focused on what's happening here and now, whether it's a one-off issue or something that's impacting all of our customers. And honestly, we would be 100% sunk without our support motion on the CSM side. We just would not be successful at focusing on the future.
Awesome. Okay, so Greenie, one of the things you mentioned was being strategic about customer success. And I think like when I think about being strategic about customer success, the idea of like customer engagement models come to mind. So I know traditionally there's like one-to-one, and I think recently now we're starting to see customer success at scale, thinking about one-to-many. So for startups who are thinking about building out their customer success team, how do you determine the appropriate customer engagement model for your customers?
So I really, really am appreciative to ConnectRN because one thing we do is we put communication at the forefront. All feedback that is implemented to us, or all feedback that's provided to us, we make sure that we implement it in a way so that the person who came to us feels validated, they feel like they have been acknowledged, and that we are here working to resolve whatever was brought to us. So for customer engagement, I feel like it's honestly just being that person, being that CS member, being that team member, company team member, and speaking to them, taking feedback, constructive feedback, and working as a team together to figure out how we can implement it, that whatever feedback we were provided, how can we create a product, implement that, and assist them in a way that it's just like, I heard you, I see you, I'm here to help you. For me, customer engagement is a lot from the initial phone call, from the initial text, email, just anything that I can do to really assist you. And not only that, we keep constant communication with the team as well. We ensure that our team feels empowered, that if they hear something back, they provide it back to us, and we continue to just converse, speak on it, and be as transparent as we can when it comes to that conversation.
Cool. Sean, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, to kind of add on to that this is where I'm honestly like a firm believer in testing and being as scientific about it as possible. In the past, I'll openly admit I've had many failures in the past due to segmenting based on what we, the company, thought was the most appropriate experience for our customers. For example, your most strategic customer may want the most hands-off experience with your company. Your smallest customer may want the most hands-on. And starting there and really understanding what your actions in terms of your engagement channels, whether it's humans, tech, in trying to drive those behaviors you want to see in your customers. At Alice, we're in the process of scaling 2 new engagement models, one that's solely based off of tech and another one that's a little bit more one-to-many. However, what we first found out in doing and building our engagement, or actually started doing this before we built the engagement model, is testing with the whole customer base and seeing the impact, where the impact was the highest. So then we're able to take the data that we are starting to see and create new segmentations for our customers, and not use it just based off of like ARR bands or employee bands. This is starting to yield really great benefits for us, because we're not only scaling into a one-to-many motion, but we're also adding scale in a tech approach too, which traditionally a lot of companies will leave alone or actually separate out in their high-touch motion.
Okay. Kristen?
Yeah, I think about it in two different ways. I think first about segmentation within the CS department, and then I think about the overarching department. And that's really because where I am right now, it's just the two of us. So that's kind of where I am, is first we'll segment and then we'll build out, right? So first I think about segmentation and like, what are the things that separate your customers into different buckets? Meaning like, what impacts them the most to where they fit into these categories? Sometimes that might be the size of the business. Sometimes that might be geography or vertical, right? But you have to figure out like, what is the thing that matters based on your specific platform. For us, it's like the size of the company, their needs are completely different, right? So ultimately, we're going to want people to focus on those high volume customers, and then somebody who works with the smaller customers, because their needs are completely different. So that's how I think about segmentation first, or like, what are those needs and what are the things that kind of put them into those buckets? And then in terms of growing the actual department, as I've said, right now, we're just CS. So first and foremost, they need things in their hands before they need support. Then they'll have support. Ultimately, I do believe that we'll eventually need some form of a one-to-many. I think it's really imperative, because you can't scale people enough for it to make sense, right? Once you get to a certain size, it just doesn't work. So what that will look for us, I'm not quite sure yet, because we're so small that things change constantly. But I do think ultimately it's really important to think about how can we scale long-term, and some form of a one-to-many, whether that be, like Sean was saying, some integrated way in which all of our customers get both, or if it's just one's high touch, one's low touch, we'll figure it out. But I think the reason why I keep saying we'll figure it out is because we can't give you, this is what works, right? It's truly based on your customers, what their needs are, how they fit, how they work with your product. And one business is going to be completely different than the other. So I'm with Sean in that right now. We're experimenting, we're figuring out what that looks like, and we'll be continuing to experiment for a very long time.
Awesome. So Krista, I kind of want to follow up on that. Because you mentioned, it's kind of this dance of finding like the right balance of like how to meet the customer need, but also thinking about like building out scalable customer engagement. Like, how are you guys like thinking about like the balance of like finding like that right person, that right team for the customer to talk to without damaging that customer experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. Right now, it's easy. There's very little of us. So we just, I talk to them, or my CSM talks to them, and that's about it. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's huge. And I think too, it's like, it's also about how we pass off the information from sales to CS and what the need is, right? Like in some businesses, you do want the two to come together and at least have some form of a warm handoff, and then maybe they come back in later on. I am a strong believer in CS owning the relationship once they have that relationship. So maybe it's some form of a soft handoff or something, but I know as a consumer that it gets confusing if I work with this person for 2 calls and then I work with this person for 3 calls and then they pass me off here, right? So for me, I believe that you come from sales, you get passed off. Now this is my account or this is your account until it no longer makes sense. And so I hold all that information. And I think that's really helpful too, because once we build those relationships, they trust us more. So even if they're having conversations with, say, my marketing person, because we're going to do a use case with them, I still want to be included, whether it just be CC'd or whatever. I still want the CSM to be included there. So we have all knowledge. We're almost like we are the source of truth, right? In some form. So I think that that's best for the customer more than anything.
Cool. Greenie, what do you think?
To piggyback off of what Kristen says, I absolutely agree. I think when you have them speaking to multiple people at once, or at different stages, it can cause confusion, and it can kind of cause the customer to become upset, or like they're not going to get the solution, like they're not going to get the problem solved. So what we do is we actually empower the CS team members to have open communication with sales, account managers. Sorry, I'm getting tongue tied. And honestly, everyone on the Connect RN team. In Salesforce, they might post a comment with includes leadership, the account manager, for that facility, maybe even like a clinician, HR, whoever. And they'll ask a question, and that individual will respond, and the CS team member will call the clinician or the facility with that feedback. We truly believe in kind of empowering CS to own it, so that not only do they always have the answer for whatever the person may call, but also it helps to dumb down that irritation or that constant transferring. We try to minimize transferring unless it's absolutely necessary, but it also builds up that communication, as well as that relationship.
Cool. Sean?
This is honestly, it's always a problem as you grow and scale. I don't think I've ever not run into problems with this. So one thing like I found that you really need to be clear about internally is who owns the customer relationship at what stage in that activity, and what are those stages, especially from the customer point of view. So for example, if you bring on an account management team, it's a brand new function to your organization. When and where do they start their responsibilities? Do they have ownership of the customer over the CSM, et cetera, et cetera? These are all important things to start thinking about and map out before you really dive into just building and hitting the go button on that function. 100% agree with Kristen on this. Is we also love to think of our CSMs as we always use this term from American football. It's like they are the quarterback of the account. They need to know what is going on, but they may not necessarily be running point. And I do firmly believe in that, because they're the ones that, at the end of the day, they're trusted advisors for your customer. You want them to be thought of on your customer's team versus working for their vendor, and that's such an ideal situation to be in with your customers.
Okay, so Greenie, I think a couple questions back, you mentioned working with a plethora of teams, and I thought that was super interesting. And so one of the things I wanted to dig into is, what departments should customer success work with closely?
That is a good one. So I think we should work closely with sales, product, and operations. Only because with sales, you definitely want to review the reach that you're having, the retention, the growth that you've received within, like, let's say the past month, quarter, year, so on and so forth. And as for operations, I feel like working closely together with them allows us to continue to trial and error. What is going to work? What is not? Can we make this happen? If we can, what can we do to make it successful? Honestly, I think, and this is where I'm a little biased, I think CS should always work with everyone. I don't think there should ever be like a door closed. I think there should always be a door open, because again, I am a firm believer that everyone on the team is a CS rep, because that's what we're there for. We're here to assist. We're here to scale. We're here to grow. We're here to represent our company best of our abilities. And I truly, truly believe that everyone is a CS rep. And I think Connect RN like exemplifies that. But to hone it in, I think sales and operations would be probably the very first step.
Okay, Sean?
Yeah, just to piggyback off of that, CS is one of those departments that the majority of its abilities to achieve the results are so dependent on other teams. And they're typically, and it does change based off of what company you're in, but the three I typically always prioritize are sales, finance, and product. At its core, it's really so important to understand what motivates those individuals or those departments, and how can you help in your position at in customer success. This way you can start having that real conversation about what you should and what you can expect from them. That way it's a two-way street, and making sure like you have that unwritten rule or written rule with each department is going to help push not only just your agenda with making sure your customers are successful, but furthering other departments and getting stronger relationships with each department too, because it's all about creating those really strong relationships, or else you're going to struggle to get those results because you could be so dependent on getting progress in sales, for example, if you want to improve your sales to CS handover.
Kristen, any final thoughts?
Yeah, so I feel really strongly about relationships with sales, product, and marketing, actually. So I think about it in like a post and pre-sale. And so with pre-sales, like sales and marketing and CS need to have the same ideals around the talk track. Why are we doing what we're doing? What is the problem we are trying to solve? And what is our ideal customer profile, right? And I think with marketing, especially, like if they don't know what is making our customers successful, what are the things that are making them stay, then they won't know the things to amplify to make sure that we get more of those customers, right? And the same goes with sales. If they don't know the right use cases to talk to customers about, if they don't know what is going to make those customers successful, then we're going to see more churn just from having the wrong customers coming in. So I think that it's really imperative that that core group of departments has a really strong bond and has lots of conversations around who are our customers and why. And then in terms of product, as I talked about earlier, how CS is so important in getting all of the customer feedback and what's working, what's not into the organization. Ultimately, that's product, right? And I think if you don't have a strong relationship with product, then they have an agenda, you have an agenda, and they're not coming together, right? And ultimately, we need to have the same agenda. The end goal is for us to create a product that works best for our customers. And the only way that product can know how to do that is by talking to everyone who talks to the customers, right? That's not just CS, that's sales too, for sure. But we're talking about CS. So I think that it's really important for them to have a strong relationship.
Okay, so Kristen, something I want to dive into deeper. So you mentioned that teams have different agendas. And oftentimes, like with different agendas comes different tools. And if our main goal is to solve for the customer, I'm curious, like, what tools do you use in CS to scale your customer engagement and work in tandem with the other departments that you mentioned?
Right this second, I am the wrong person to ask that question to, because there are 15 of us and the answer is spreadsheets. But ultimately, I have been in other organizations where I do believe that Salesforce was created for sales, right? And it works for a time period. And then you get to a point where it's like, okay, well, it's really difficult for me to understand the engagement between my customers and the product through Salesforce, right? It's really hard for me to build a true health score when I can't really see what's happening inside the product through the tool I'm using. So I think the answer is there's a lot of tools out there now that are great for CS, and you do get to a point where it's like, okay, we need a CS tool to be able to truly see how our customers are thriving within the product. But when you're as small as me, the answer is spreadsheets. And Google Docs.
Oh, no. Okay.
And Notion.
Okay. Sean, you mentioned scaling out customer success using tech. What are some of the tools you guys are using?
Yeah, I think even before jumping into like what tools we use, I find it's so important to have frameworks, your operating mechanisms, and your process defined before your tooling. This is why I'm a massive advocate, mainly because I've hired this position too late, but hiring a CS ops person super early on. Without it, honestly, we'd be all over the place. We wouldn't have that person that's thinking about our frameworks, our OpMex, or our process. They really help us understand what we currently have at our company, how we can leverage existing tools, and most importantly, how we can get to our outcomes that we do desire at the end of the day with that tech and that data. So overall, with By20, I think the most important thing is sound data hygiene, irregardless of the product. So if your source of truth is broken, any product you use will inherit those issues. I can tell you from painful experience, I have gone through that multiple times. So just a quick example here is like, while we use Salesforce for all of our commercial customer data needs, it allows our support team and our CS teams to operate in different tools, but those tools are more viewed as process improvement versus the source of truth. And that's a big fundamental difference that we have. Like, we want to make sure our commercial data set is sound. We're not buying other tools to be other sources of truth. So it allows us the capabilities to not only grow and improve as we're growing, but it make sure like we're always keeping that customer experience fluid, because that data is visible and it's central to the company. So it does help us scale because we can easily look at other tools in our ecosystem because our data hygiene is centralized. And just to name a few where we've been is like, we really prioritize. We do use Salesforce, although our customer team is in Help Scout, and we're onboarding with a newer CS tool right now in Catalyst. But we also heavily use a tool called Looker, and that's what's allowed us to scale, because it gives us an understanding of our holistic customers, so we can see what are those behaviors, so we can start driving the process to improve there. So we use a lot at the end of the day, but we really focus on the data hygiene at first, because we want that to be sound, or else everything else would just be broken around us.
In spreadsheets, right?
And spreadsheets. Lots of spreadsheets. I can't tell you how many spreadsheets we have too on top of that.
Greeny, what tools are you guys using?
So we use Salesforce, but I am in complete support with Kristen. It depends on the need of the company and like what your mission is, how much you're growing. Like, Salesforce for us right now is everyone's best friend, as well as spreadsheets. And I hate to admit it, Google Docs as well. Hate Google Docs with a burning passion. But we use Salesforce. Salesforce allows us to have, like, provides us with metrics. So that is our go-to tool, where we can see, okay, how are we scaling? What have we, like, how many clinicians have we reached out to within the past week compared to the month prior? How many facilities are now, like, have we gained traction with it? Salesforce for us is like that go-to tool, and it allows us to communicate with our not only CS ops, but like operations and all other departments. Like, okay, we've reached this goal. Now it's time to kind of see where we're about to, or it's time to start creating a plan for like the next quarter or next month or so. Like, what is our goal for this? Sorry, my answer is a little tongue-tied. I realize that, like, my brain is moving faster than my mouth. But it provides us with that information so that we can like ascertain our goals and then try in our objectives and to reach that goal. We have a lot of spreadsheets, Kristen, a lot of spreadsheets that we are constantly in communication using, reviewing. We have like meetings based off the metrics gathered on those spreadsheets, so we continue to scale and see where the need lies and how as CS we can continue to help support.
Okay, so from listening to everyone speak, like, the one thing that I captured were, spreadsheets and then a lot of third-party tools. And so I know this probably isn't necessarily like a question for this particular conversation, but I just wanted to pose it to the panel. At what point do we think about building out our own internal tools to be a source of truth or for process improvement? If anyone wants to go, be my guest. But if not, we can definitely move on to the final question. But
I mean, I think when you get to the point where you're in a lot of spreadsheets and you're like, this is too many spreadsheets, I think that's when you get to the point where you're like, all right, we need another solution here. I agree with Sean that like you need a source of truth regardless of of what it is and don't change it when you add new tools, right? So I think ultimately that probably ends up being Salesforce for most of us, because that's where we start, right? So always have that source of truth. Make sure everyone knows what that source of truth is. And when you get to the point where you're like, I really want to understand, for instance, the usage of my customers, and I can't understand that from Salesforce and my spreadsheets, that's when you get to the point where you're like, okay, maybe I need something that can help me get a little further here. Or I think too, if we think broader than just like a CRM, you know, when you get to the point where you're like, okay, I think we need some form of a one-to-many motion, that's when you can start to think too, what does this look like? What types of tools do I need to use to actually do this effectively, and not like I'm a chicken without a head running around like my spreadsheets all over the place. So.
Yeah, 100% that. And just to add on to that, it's also one of the things we do, and kind of a philosophy we have, is can we use our existing stack to accomplish things? And at what point will that break the experience or be too much burden on the team? And that's when we start saying, all right, now it makes sense to start thinking about budgeting and making the use case to purchase something that will make this experience not only better for the customer, but for the employee that actually is managing it too.
That's a great point. I was actually just having this conversation on Friday on how some of the things that we're doing are getting to the point where it's just too much, and it feels like there has to be a better process for this, right? And I think that that's the breaking point, right? When you get to the point where you're like, all right, this is too much. There's got to be a solution here. And then obviously our job is to figure out what that solution is. But I do think that's a great point. That's exactly the breaking point.
Greenie, anything you wanted to add on?
Oh, I just feel like that's a constant conversation, especially if you're in a startup, where if it's just like, let's say it begins with like 5 people. Okay, we're doing really well. Now we bumped up to 10. Now we bumped up to 20. At what point do we are like, whatever it is that we were using, at what point are we like, okay, it's time to start looking at new measures, new products, new any and everything really, to get us to the point that everything is now becoming more streamlined and there's a more successful, and I hate to say, but even an easier way to do what it is or accomplish what it is that we're trying to accomplish. Again, especially with startup, because we know there's constant change. What was good yesterday is not going to be good at noon today, you know what I mean, or next month. And I think also flexibility when it comes to that as well. Like, okay, we understand now we're about to make a significant change. We have to have that flexibility, understanding that what's going on today, it's not going to be the same as tomorrow. So yeah.
Cool. Okay. So final question as we wrap up, and I'm very interested to hear everyone's answer to this question. So Kristen, we'll start with you. What is one word that defines your philosophy on customer success, and why?
I don't think this is going to be a surprise to anybody based on all the things I've said today, but relationships is the word for me. I think ultimately, if I have a strong relationship with you, you trust me. And so if I tell you, hey, this is the best thing for you to go do right now, you're going to believe me. The same is true the other way, right? If we have this relationship, you trust me enough to say, hey, Kristen, this just didn't work, right? Instead of you sitting back, having these feelings like this isn't working for me, making a decision that you're going to leave and just come to me to leave, right? So I think relationships allow us to do all of these things that we're trying to do. And without those relationships, we can't have those candid conversations. We can't assist them the way we want to assist them, and vice versa. I also would say relationships internally too, just to jump in, because I think Sean said it at one point. Like, it's actually relationships all the way around, right? Like, that's really what makes us tick.
Cool. Greenie?
I would say communication externally, communication internally. I think that having even like just the foundation of being able to openly converse, be open and honest with one another, like Kristen said, this is working, this isn't working. I think setting up that foundation of being able to just speak with you freely, give you honest, constructive feedback, positive, whatever may have you, and being able to take that back as well is what customer success is all about. And whether that's coming from the outside in or it's a conversation we're having within our company or within our community, I think communication is key when it comes to customer success.
Awesome. And Sean, want to wrap us up?
This is really hard going last because I agree with everything. It's going to be very similar. So I'm going to choose the word listening, and it's so key in any customer success function, whether that is internal or external. If you aren't listening to your customers, you might not be advising them on the correct path, or they might be leaving because of that. If you're not listening to your internal stakeholders, your counterparts across. You aren't helping them reach their goals, or while challenging them to keep the customer at the center of all of that. And then finally, if you aren't listening to your employees, they're honestly one of the most important assets in any company. So when you listen and empower them, you can achieve those great things with that team. And I'm going to butcher this quote, but this is a quote I always love using from Steve Jobs. But it's great things in business are never done by one person; they're always done by a team of people. I think I might have nailed that, but someone will probably have to fact check me.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, great answers from everyone. And so it looks like we have a little over 11 minutes left in the session. We have a couple questions in the Q&A. I'll bring those up in a second. But for folks that are listening in, please take this time to write in your questions. We have 10 more minutes with this esteemed panel, and they've dropped a lot of gems and just overall thinking of how to think about customer success. So definitely take this opportunity to ask your question while we have the time remaining. And so with that, first question is from Rebecca. So Rebecca says, as head of customer marketing, including lifecycle marketing and advocacy marketing, I have the same goals as CS, net revenue retention. But my work is one-to-many and their work is one-to-one. What best practices have you learned from your working with customer marketing? And I'll let anyone take the stab at this first.
Can I just say hi, Rebecca? I used to work with Rebecca at Constant Contact, so hi. I think in general, like working with customer marketing is so imperative for, basically all the reasons that we had talked about in terms of the marketing and CS together. There's so much information that if CS isn't giving you as the head of customer marketing the gems that we're receiving from our customers, you're inferring, right? And you might be right, but you might not be. And so I think it's incredibly important for us to have a very close relationship with you and your team so that we can make sure that we're all understanding what the customer needs, what's resonating with that customer. And then that way you're also giving them the education pieces they need to continue to succeed.
Awesome. Anyone else?
Yeah, 100% agree with everything Kristen just said. And one of the things that's super important for us when we're working with our customer marketing team is their goals are a lot around driving advocacy. And advocacy isn't necessarily linear. It's always happens at different moments. So how can we as a customer success organization help customer marketing make sure they're delivering on use cases, reviews, social impressions, all of that amazing stuff that they do in conjunction? How can they help us figure out how do we create that flywheel of advocates? So you may have advocates that are literally just starting with your company. How do you nurture that in an onboarding phase? How do you nurture that more in a later stage phase? And what are kind of that air cover or those programs you can co-create together at a one-to-many approach to kind of create a lot of groundswell with advocacy. And that helps a lot, not only with the customer success motion, because if you have advocates, they're most likely renewing. If not, they're also probably upselling as well. But it does also impact the marketing and the new business number too, because you have a lot of people really advocating for your brand and creating those referrals, which are amazing leads for that acquisition team.
Kristen and Sean, I could have said it better. We keep, I know for us at Connect RN, we keep marketing and CS in constant communication with one another. So whenever marketing is getting ready to launch something, we're made aware as well as encouraged to share it as much as we can to gain that traction. And our marketing team is very similar to Sean. It's also it also centers around advocation, and transparency as well. So together we're like answering questions or asking the questions, okay, from this point forward, how can we continue to advocate properly, or continue to scale, or continue to have that retention? So I think that communication with marketing and CS, because I see that I personally feel like they work hand in hand with one another in achieving the objectives and goals of each company.
Awesome. Okay. So next question. Let's see. Oh, is this on the screen? Okay. Next question is from Chelsea. Would you recommend the same practice if your business is serving the general public? Example, we take more than 400 calls a week with 4 CS team members. So the idea that they can get the same CS rep each time doesn't seem feasible. Sean, looks like you empathize with this question. You want to kick us off?
Yeah, we at a different company, not at my current company, we had this challenge where we had 2 CSMs covering about 4,000, 5,000 accounts. So you definitely don't get the same person every single time, because it just isn't practical. So there's 2 things we did to help improve that experience. One is we set that expectation with the customer, so they knew that was what was going to happen. So instead of saying you're having a relationship with a person, this person is this business unit, this is our customer success team, regardless of that person. And it's so key, especially as you're scaling your company and you might be moving from a higher touch white glove model to a lower touch model. It's just setting that expectation with your customer so they know the experience that they'll be getting. And that's so key up front. I will say from failure, we did not do a great job of that. And then when we did it again at a different stage of our company, it went off really amazing, because the customers knew what they were getting themselves into. They knew what they expected. So there wasn't that friction point anymore. So the biggest thing for me is always like set that expectation up front with your customers, because if you don't, they'll take their own perceptions into account, and it could be a perception from a past experience with a different vendor or a vendor in a completely different market. So make sure you take that time to educate your customers.
Sean, I think that's a great point. And I think really what I heard was transparency. And I think that's true both internally and externally for this. I mean, in general, but in this situation specifically, because if we're sharing, in Sean's example, 4,000 customers with 2 people, we need to make sure that we have the right processes in place to we transfer that knowledge, right, in the right way. And so I think that if I were in your shoes, Chelsea, what I would be really focusing on is how do I make sure that we're transferring that knowledge internally properly so that the customer, regardless of who they're talking to, feels like they're talking to the same person because they have the same knowledge, regardless of the human that they're conversing with.
And I agree with that as well. Whenever we have a call or anyone who is speaking with CS, we do let them know there's a possibility that you may not get the person that you were in conversation with before, but Salesforce, we are able to like notate as much as we can regarding like the previous conversation that was had. So even if I were to call and follow up, whoever is working with me already has that information right there in front of them, and they can continue follow up. And they can just honestly pick up where I left off. And so that person doesn't feel like, there's like a trust that's set there, instead of feeling like, oh, I don't know, I don't want to have to reiterate what I just said and over again. Now I feel like my problem's just going to fall by the wayside. We're very transparent from the very beginning. There's a possibility that you may not find that, you may not follow up with this person, but you will follow up with someone, and all of the information that you provided me with will be reiterated to that team member that does follow up with you.
Awesome. And it looks like James has popped up with the 5-minute warning.
Yeah, we just got a few minutes left, guys.
2 minutes left? Yeah. Okay, folks, a few minutes left. We only had 2 questions come in. Please, take the last 3 minutes, ask a question, type it in chat, Q&A, whatever is most readily available. But in the meantime, I definitely want to thank the panelists for sharing all the knowledge that they had today. This is a very super insightful conversation, and I hope for the folks that are listening, this helps give some plan of attack into how you should structure your customer success org within your startup. And definitely take the opportunity to contact everyone here, reach out on LinkedIn, email, hit up James for all the information. James, I'm putting you on the spot. And yeah, this is, oh, cool. All right, question from Paul. Here we go. Paul says, what do you think is the future for CS at large? How will it continue to evolve over time?
I'll take this one. To put it simply, I feel like CS is going to end up taking over the world, right? Because there's not an industry, there's not any opportunity you don't have. I'm sorry, there's not an industry in which you're contacting and you don't come in contact with a CS team member. I think CS will continue to scale, and over time, it will become more streamlined and more relied upon. Just recently, there's been such a huge boost and boom, excuse me. I'm having the most nervous moment right now, and it's horrible. But I think CS will continue to scale. I think CS will continue to just grow from this point forward, especially as more startups are entering the workplace. You will see a huge increase in CS companies, organizations, and communities as well.
I agree, Greenie. And I think that the fact that two of the three of us had net revenue retention as a goal is actually an indicator of how CS is changing, right? And I think it's going to continue to do so. So as CS grows, as there are more and more platforms, businesses understanding the importance of CS, that means they're also understanding that CS is here to help you grow revenue, not stop people from leaving, right? Ultimately, growing revenue does stop people from leaving, but that's not the thing that you should be thinking of when you think about CS. And I think the more the leadership of these different organizations start to think of CS as a revenue generator, the more you're going to see CS thrive, both the CSMs themselves and also within the organization, because they'll understand the true value of what the CS team brings to the organization.
Just because I 100% agree with everything both Kristen and Greenie just said. The only thing I would add on is there's been such a movement over the past 2 years to focus on the experience of your customers in B2B and just learning from the B2C. So as we start thinking about how B2B evolves and how the sales experience evolves, how the marketing relationship, and at the core, as you're focusing on the customer experience, all these things are starting to really change in how to put the customer at the center of everything we do, whether it's sales, it's marketing, it's product. So we're definitely seeing a change and a shift in kind of the industry as a whole, which is really, really exciting. And I'm super excited where we're going to go in the next several years based off of just, if anything's indicative of what happened in the past 2 years.
All right, time is up. All good things must come to an end. So thank you all. Thanks to the speakers for the great session. We've got some more great content coming up. So be sure to click on the agenda link at the top and check it out. Hope to see you all soon. Thanks again, guys. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.